There is a moment in the long and violent history of the universe when a species stops hiding from the stars and decides to own one. For humanity, that moment had a name. They called it the Dyson Experiment, and when the first panel of the sphere locked into orbital position around Sol-Proxima, every scientist who had spent decades building toward this instant fell completely, breathlessly silent. Not from awe, from fear, because they all understood what it meant to reach into the heart of a living star and close your fist around it. Stars do not surrender their power without a fight. And if a single gravitational model was wrong, if one thermal coefficient had been misread, the most ambitious structure humanity had ever built would become the most spectacular tomb the cosmos had ever witnessed. Welcome to Beyond Impossible, the show where we don't ask whether something can be done. We ask what it cost the people who refused to accept that it couldn't. I'm glad you're here. Every episode of this series is built around a single pivotal moment in humanity's story. A moment when the margin for error was already gone, the odds were already impossible, and a small group of people decided to move forward anyway. Not because success was guaranteed, because the alternative was standing still. If that sounds like your kind of story, hit subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Because what we're about to walk through will test everything you think you know about what human beings are capable of. This is the Dyson Experiment. Let's go. The ship was called the Heliostride, and she was not built for beauty. She was built for endurance, a 700-meter engineering platform designed to operate in the chromospheric boundary zone of Sol-Proxima, close enough to the star's outer atmosphere that her hull plating ran at a constant 400 degrees Celsius, even with magnetospheric shielding at full draw. Her crew of 22 lived inside a pressurized inner core, wrapped in radiation-absorbent composite and superconducting thermal mesh. On most days, the ship felt less like a vessel and more like a sealed fist punching through a wall of fire. Commander Yara Osei had commanded the Heliostride for 3 years. She was 41, Nigerian-born, with a background in stellar dynamics and a reputation for being the kind of person who did not raise her voice when things went wrong. She simply got quieter and more precise and considerably more dangerous. She had been selected not because she was the most brilliant mind on the roster, though she was certainly among them, but because she understood how to make decisions when the margin for error had already been consumed. Her chief engineer, Dr. Rafiq Salazar, had written the thermal regulation algorithms governing the sphere's inner panel network. He knew those algorithms the way a composer knows a symphony, every variable, every assumption, every place where the math was clean, and every place where it was held together by elegant approximation. It was Salazar who first noticed the anomaly 46 minutes after the primary segment achieved full operational lock. He noticed it the way you notice a sound in a house that has always been silent. Not because it was loud, but because it was wrong. The star was responding. Sol-Proxima's internal convection patterns had begun to shift. The heliosysmic sensors registered a low-frequency oscillation propagating upward through the radiative zone, climbing toward the convective layer like a tremor ascending through bedrock before an earthquake breaks the surface. The sphere's presence, the partial occlusion of the star's radiative output, the electromagnetic interference pattern generated by the energy collection grid, had altered the convective equilibrium of a living stellar body. They had disturbed it, and Sol-Proxima, burning at 5200 Kelvin across its surface, was beginning, in its vast and indifferent way, to react. Osei recorded the transmission herself, her voice carrying the calibrated calm of someone who understood that panic across interstellar distances was still panic. She laid out the oscillation signature, the convective shift, the projected timeline, and then said, "We believe the sphere's partial enclosure has initiated a feedback interaction with the star's internal pressure gradient. Do not reduce panel deployment. Pulling segments now could destabilize the orbital lattice. We hold position and we solve this. The response from Earth, 8 minutes and 36 seconds later, was organized chaos rendered into professional language. 43 astrophysicists had been pulled into an emergency session within minutes of Osei's transmission, reaching the consortium's deep space monitoring facility. Their collective conclusion confirmed what Osei and Salazar already feared. The oscillation was propagating from the radiative convective boundary layer, nearly 200,000 kilometers below Sol-Proxima's photosphere. The models gave them 19 hours before it reached the convective zone's upper boundary. What happened after that depended on its amplitude at the moment of transition. Below a specific threshold, the star's own magnetic field would dampen it. Above it, the convective zone would amplify the wave into coronal restructuring. The sphere's panel network was never designed to survive. Salazar spent 4 hours running thermal cascade models with his engineering team, mapping every scenario in which the sphere's existing configuration could be adjusted to reduce the electromagnetic interference pattern driving the feedback loop. Every scenario returned the same answer from a different direction. Partial solutions existed, but each introduced new instability elsewhere. Reducing the collection grid's output frequency would lower the interference signature, but it would cause a thermal buildup in the inner panel layer that the radiative cooling channels could not safely discharge. Rotating the primary arc to increase the star's radiative escape corridor would reduce the pressure differential, but coordinating 400,000 panels without disrupting gravitational balance required 31 hours. 12 more than they had. It was Dr. Amara Osei, Yara's younger sister, the Heliostride's heliophysicist, who had argued during the design phase that the interaction models were insufficiently conservative, who identified the narrow path through the problem. Not a solution, a direction. She traced the oscillations propagation curve and said quietly that the only way to interrupt the feedback loop without touching the panel configuration was to introduce a counter-oscillation into the star's own magnetic field. To use the sphere's electromagnetic emission array not as a collection system, but as an instrument. To play the star like a resonance chamber and cancel the wave before it reached the convective boundary. The silence lasted 11 seconds, then Salazar said it was theoretically possible. The margin of error was 0.003%. Osei looked at her sister, at Salazar, at the oscillation climbing steadily toward the threshold that ended everything and said, "Start building the model." They had 14 hours left when the second anomaly appeared. 3 coronal loops in the star's northern magnetic hemisphere had begun to interact, their field lines braiding together in magnetic reconnection, which Amara described to the crew as the stellar equivalent of a compressed spring releasing inside a sealed container. The sphere's electromagnetic interference pattern was not merely disturbing internal convection. It was simultaneously destabilizing the coronal magnetic architecture. 2 cascading failures feeding each other, accelerating toward the same catastrophic endpoint from different directions. The revised timeline, 11 hours. The counter-oscillation model was not finished. Under normal conditions, it would not be finished in 11 hours. These were not normal conditions. Amara divided her team into parallel tracks, one group continuing the primary model, a second running a stripped-down emergency variant that sacrificed precision for speed. The emergency variant's error margin sat at 0.019%. In any other context, extraordinary. In the context of introducing a precisely tuned electromagnetic pulse into the magnetic field of a living star, 0.019% was the difference between success and an event that would be studied grimly by whatever civilization came after humanity had the misfortune of building here. 3 exterior maintenance drones were deployed to reconfigure the emission array's forward aperture cluster. a 9-hour process that Salazar's team compressed into 5 through parallel tasking, manual override of safety sequencing protocols, and what Salazar described with characteristic understatement as aggressive improvisation. 2 drones survived. The third was caught in a coronal loop discharge. No sensor had predicted and vaporized so completely that the debris tracking system registered nothing, not even particulate matter. Just absence where a machine had been. Nobody spoke about it. There was no time to speak about it. With 6 hours remaining, Amara ran the final validation and found a critical phase alignment error buried in the 4th harmonic, one that, if transmitted, would not cancel the oscillation but amplify it. She caught it with 4 hours and 51 minutes to spare. The fix required rebuilding the harmonic stack from the 3rd layer upward. It took her 2 hours and 17 minutes without pause. When she finished, her hands were shaking and she was crying without appearing to notice it. The model was ready. 2 hours and 34 minutes remained. The emission array came online at 2 hours and 11 minutes remaining, and the sound it made, a deep, subsonic vibration moving through the hull like a slow tide, was unlike anything the crew had heard in 3 years of operations. Not mechanical, resonant, the way a cathedral resonates when its organ first draws breath. Several crew members later described feeling it in their chests before they heard it with their ears. Salazar stood at the engineering console with his hand on the manual abort trigger. He had written the algorithms. If they failed, he wanted to be the one holding them when they did. At 2 hours and 9 minutes, Osei gave the order. The Heliostride's reconfigured emission array projected a precisely shaped electromagnetic pulse into Sol-Proxima's coronal magnetic field. Not a broadcast, not a weapon, but something far more audacious. A question posed to a star in the only language a star understands. The language of magnetic flux and plasma pressure and the fundamental frequencies at which stellar matter organizes itself. They were targeting a heliosismic wave propagating 200,000 kilometers below the photosphere, using a model built in 11 sleepless hours with a 0.019% error margin. The improbability should have been paralyzing. Instead, the crew stood at their stations in absolute silence and watched the data. For 47 seconds, nothing changed. The oscillation continued its climb toward the convective boundary. The coronal loops continued their magnetic reconnection sequence. The reconnection rate actually increased by 0.4% in the first 30 seconds, and Salazar's hand tightened on the abort trigger, and Amara closed her eyes and did not open them. And Osei watched the holographic display with the stillness of someone who has already made their peace with every possible outcome, and is simply present for whichever one arrives. At 48 seconds, the oscillation's propagation velocity decreased by a measurable fraction. At 90 seconds, all 5 heliosismic sensors agreed. The counter-oscillation was coupling with the stellar magnetic field at precisely the predicted depth, bleeding the wave's energy fraction by fraction, the way a damper bleeds vibration from a structure under seismic load. The physics was working. The coronal reconnection rate began to fall 19 minutes later, steadily, then with gathering momentum. At 1 hour and 12 minutes remaining, the reconnection sequence fell below self-sustaining threshold. The coronal mass ejection was not going to fire. Salazar removed his hand from the abort trigger. Amara opened her eyes. Osei exhaled once, then immediately said, "The oscillation is still propagating. We are not done. Maintain full emission output and get me an updated convective boundary projection in 10 minutes. The oscillation reached the radiative convective boundary at 53 minutes remaining. It arrived weaker than worst-case projections, but stronger than best-case scenarios had hoped, placing it squarely in the transition zone, the range where the convective layer's response depended not on clean physics, but on the unmeasurable turbulent state of churning stellar plasma at the precise moment the wave made contact. Amara looked at the boundary crossing data and told Osei, with the honesty of someone who has exhausted every alternative to the truth that the model could no longer predict what the star would do. They were past the edge of the calculable. What happened next belonged to the star. The star amplified, not catastrophically, not at the worst projected rate. But the convective zone caught the weakened oscillation and fed it, the way a resonance chamber feeds a note matching its natural frequency, and the wave began climbing again toward the photosphere. If it arrived at current growth rate, panel loss estimates ranged from 12 to 31% of the primary arc, and a 31% loss would cascade through the orbital lattice's gravitational balance and initiate structural unraveling, consuming the remaining segments within 72 hours. All 47 years, every panel, every conduit, every superconducting node, every decade of accumulated human ingenuity, dismantled by a star that had simply decided to shrug. It was Chief Navigator Deo Mensa who identified the option no one else had reached, because no one else had been looking at the orbital mechanics with the specific, exhausted desperation of someone who had run out of every other direction to look. Mensa was 34, quiet, relentlessly methodical. He had spent the last 6 hours running trajectory calculations for emergency panel reconfigurations that the lattice's gravitational constraints kept rendering impossible. He had been about to abandon the approach entirely when he found it, not a reconfiguration, a redirection. The Heliostride carried 6 high-output electromagnetic emitters in her ventral hull array, installed for close-range panel alignment during deployment. Not powerful enough individually to influence stellar magnetic field topology at depth. But if the ship repositioned to a specific point in the chromospheric boundary zone, closer to the star's surface than she had ever operated, closer than her thermal shielding was rated to sustain for more than 18 minutes, and fired all 6 emitters simultaneously in a precisely coordinated burst, they could introduce a localized magnetic field perturbation directly into the convective layer's upper boundary. Not a counter-oscillation, a deflection, redirecting the wave's energy vector away from the primary arc's orbital position. 18 minutes at that depth meant hull temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius. After 22 minutes, thermal saturation would begin degrading the superconducting mesh. After that, minutes before structural failure propagated through the inner core, Mensa presented the calculation without editorializing. Osei read it in silence. She looked at the oscillation's position in the convective layer. She looked at the 18-minute window. Then she sat down at the navigation console, pulled up the approach trajectory, and began calculating the entry vector herself, because she was the commander and this was her ship, and some decisions do not get delegated. She told the crew to brace for chromospheric descent, and the Heliostride pointed her bow toward the star. The descent took 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and it was the longest 4 minutes and 17 seconds in the recorded history of human spaceflight. The Heliostride drove into the chromospheric boundary zone at a trajectory no vessel had ever attempted, her magnetospheric shielding blazing at maximum draw, her hull plating climbing through 600, 700, 800 degrees, as the star's outer atmosphere closed around her like a fist of luminous plasma. The crew strapped in and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that the ship's hull wasn't already saying in the language of groaning metal and cascading thermal alerts. Salazar watched the shielding integrity readout with the focused calm of a man who has made his peace with the possibility that the number on his screen might simply reach 0, and kept his hands moving across the emitter calibration controls, because the alternative to moving was thinking about what happened if it did. At the designated coordinates, hull temperature reading 863 degrees, magnetospheric shielding at 71% integrity, the superstructure singing a deep harmonic groan through every compartment, Osei gave the order. All 6 ventral emitters fired simultaneously. A coordinated electromagnetic burst of precisely the frequency and phase Mensa's calculations prescribed, directed into the convective layer's upper boundary at the exact angular orientation required to intercept the oscillation's energy vector and redirect it away from the primary arc's orbital position. The burst lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds of the Heliostride holding position in the chromosphere of a living star, pouring everything she had into a targeted magnetic deflection that the laws of physics said was possible, and the engineering margin said was suicidal, and the crew of 22 said was necessary, which was the only calculation that had ever truly mattered. The oscillation deflected. The heliosismic data took 80 seconds to confirm what the magnetic field sensors suggested first, and those 80 seconds were the most precise definition of infinity anyone aboard had ever personally experienced. But the wave's energy vector shifted measurably, then definitively, rotating 11 degrees away from the primary arc's position and dissipating into the photosphere in a region of open space. The resulting surface eruption rose 40,000 kilometers above the photosphere and scattered into the stellar wind like a signal flare fired into an empty sky. The sphere's primary arc registered 0 panel loss. The orbital lattice held, the Dyson Experiment survived. The Heliostride pulled out with her shielding at 44% integrity, 3 secondary hull compartments sealed due to thermal breach, and every crew member aboard exhaling simultaneously. Salazar put his head down on his console. Amara watched Sol-Proxima's magnetic topology slowly return toward baseline, the star settling back into its ancient rhythms, the feedback loop broken at its root. She thought about 11 years of arguing that the interaction models were insufficiently conservative. She thought about being right, and how being right had not prevented any of this, and how the only thing that had was 22 people on a burning ship who refused to stop. In the months that followed, the consortium redesigned the sphere's electromagnetic emission protocols from the ground up, incorporating Sol-Proxima's response data into a new generation of stellar enclosure models that would carry Amara Osei's name in their foundational literature for 3 centuries. The revised panel deployment sequence became known as the Heliostride protocol. Within 30 years, the sphere reached 40% enclosure. Within a century, it reached full closure, and humanity drew from it an energy output that made every prior civilization on Earth look, by comparison, like candlelight. The crisis at Sol-Proxima did not become a footnote, it became a founding myth. The moment humanity learned that capturing a star was not an act of conquest, but an act of conversation, and that the conversation required listening as carefully as it required speaking. There is a certain kind of courage that history books struggle to capture, not the courage of a single charge across a battlefield, but the slower, stranger, more demanding courage of looking at something that has never been done and deciding, with full knowledge of the cost, that you are going to be the ones who do it. The crew of the Heliostride did not set out to become a myth, they set out to solve a problem. They solved it with 11 hours of improvised mathematics, a ship driven into the atmosphere of a star, and the particular human refusal to accept that the universe's indifference to our survival constitutes a final answer. The cosmos is vast and ancient and aggressively indifferent. We are small and young and absolutely, irrationally determined, and that determination has proven, again and again, to be the one force the universe did not account for when it made its rules. This has been beyond impossible. Those are not distant fires above you. Those are unclaimed power sources, and we are just getting started. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something about what human beings are actually capable of, then subscribe. Every episode of Beyond Impossible is built exactly like this one. A real crisis, real stakes, real people who refuse to quit. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's working on something hard right now, something that keeps telling them it can't be done, share this episode with them. Sometimes the most useful thing in the world is proof that someone else already did the impossible. Be the person who sends that proof. I want to hear from you in the comments. What was the moment in this story that hit hardest for you? Was it Amara catching the error with 4 hours to spare? Was it Osei pointing the ship at the star? Was it Salazar keeping his hands moving when the number on his screen was heading towards 0? Drop it below. This community is built on people who take these stories seriously, and your perspective makes every episode better. Beyond Impossible is built in collaboration with the people watching it. Your mission, if you choose to accept it. Every episode we pose a question, not a trivia question, but a decision question. The kind the people in the story actually had to answer under pressure. Here's this episode's. You are Dr. Amara Osei. You have found the phase alignment error with 4 hours and 51 minutes remaining. Fixing it requires rebuilding the harmonic stack from the third layer upward. You are not certain you can finish in time. Do you attempt the full fix, or do you transmit the flawed model and hope the error falls within tolerance? Leave your answer in the comments. There's no wrong response, but there is an honest one. And honesty is what this community runs on. We also want to hear your impossible stories, not fiction, real ones, a decision you made under pressure, a problem you solved when the margin was already gone, a moment when you or someone you know refused to accept that something couldn't be done. Send them to us. The best ones become episodes. Link in the description. For those who want to go deeper into the science, the engineering, the history behind these stories, we have a community space where the conversation continues after every episode. Link in the description. Come and find the people who watch this show for the same reasons you do.